So I appreciate everybody coming, and this is a fun, I'm looking forward to speaking to you about this. You're a little different than my typical audience. I usually have a bunch of nerdy developers in the room, and we talk about innovating on technology, but actually I work with a lot of publishers, and I've worked with a lot of community companies, and of course I'm honored to be in front of people who run such, the libraries, for example. So, but actually this eBay example reminded me of something I thought that was, so first of all, the real lesson from this is it doesn't matter how bad something looks if it's really valuable. And eBay was really valuable. The co-founder of eBay was Pierre Omidyar. And he was is this great guy. Some of you may know him from his philanthropic work, but he was an awesome guy. He's the biggest reason I joined the company. And when I joined, well, I'm sure you don't even remember, but early eBay was just this hideous site. It was so hard to use. The whole marketing story was about selling Pez dispensers, but the truth was it was electronics. And he wanted me to understand the power of community. eBay was actually the first child of the internet. At Netscape, we were always working on the plumbing, the infrastructure. But eBay was the first large-scale app built on it, and it brought the first large-scale community. And actually, Pierre wanted me to understand the power of an internet community. Many of you probably know this all too well, but I was just learning this. And he told me this story from the earliest days of eBay, which was, so yes, it was this hideous site, and the first time they got any attention, the local newspaper in Silicon Valley is the San Jose Mercury News. And they came and they did a story on eBay. It was one of the companies growing, and they included a photo. Anyway, it kind of rubbed his face in the fact that it was such an ugly site. And so he was convinced we have to fix this. And he didn't have designers at the time, so all he did was they said, let's just change it from this horrible yellow to just neutral. They just made it white background. If you know Craigslist, basically they made it look like Craigslist. And it actually caused the first ever internet community riot. They literally went online, they had boycotts, people were saying we're not going to buy on eBay anymore, it's our site, the whole thing. Anyway, that's not what he was trying to do, he just didn't want it to look so terrible. So he said, all right, and they were just about to roll out pricing, which was also a sensitive topic. So they just caved and they rolled it back. Oh. They just caved and they rolled it back in, which gave basically the community a victory. They did declare victory, they were thrilled, and a couple weeks went by, a few more weeks, and eBay back then was one of the few success stories when the sort of .com thing was going bad. And so now I forget which news station, but one of the news stations wanted to do a story on eBay. So they came and Pierre is looking through the camera at the screen and he's like, I can't do it. So this time he was a little more clever. For the next 2 weeks, every couple days, they pushed live a slightly lighter shade of yellow. And at the end of 2 weeks, it was a white background and nobody said a thing. And he told me that story, and I thought it was funny. He wanted me to understand the power of the community. And later on, I learned this. Facebook has learned this. All of us have learned this over and over, the power of a community. Many of you leverage the power of a community. Okay, I wanted to talk about some of the lessons. Kevin did a good job telling you a bit about me. And all I do now after eBay is I'm an advisor and an investor in a set of startups, and I do spend some time, like I did with Ithaka's organization, on helping the team sort of apply latest practices. But I'm lucky I get to work with a lot of the best teams in our industry, and I have since I started this share best practices, a bit of an aggregator and curator and evangelist for techniques. So what I wanted to talk about, what are some of the keys to successful, I want to qualify this. I'm not trying to argue these techniques would be relevant if you're creating, a new brand of soap or something that a Procter & Gamble might do. But for what we do, and I believe what you do, technology-powered services. I do think those are different. They're harder, way harder, I believe. And so I picked a set of techniques that I thought would be interesting for you. I tried to pick 10 techniques that I thought would really make a difference for you, but also be non-intuitive, a little counterintuitive even, so that maybe it causes you to think. Some of these will go right to some of the sacred cows in terms of how your institutions work. But also, if you were to look back at, say, the last couple years of the various technology initiatives that your institutions have done, and then sort of grade yourself, grade your, not you, but grade your organizations in terms of the batting average of those technology initiatives. If you're like most that I've experienced, you will probably have not very impressive batting average. And what I wanted to do is hopefully shine a light on some of those differences. And that's why I say many of these are counterintuitive. I will tell you straight up that the way the best teams in the world, it's not even about Silicon Valley anymore. Some of my favorite teams in the world are right here actually in Brooklyn, where the Etsy team is, for example, amazing team. Or in Berlin, or in Stockholm, where the Spotify team is. They're some of the best teams in the world. They're all over the place now. But I will say straight up that the best teams don't do technology initiatives the way your institutions probably do. So there's a reason, I think, for the differences, and I want to talk about those. Okay. I'd argue that the first one is actually probably the most important. A lot of people think Silicon Valley is all about making money. And honestly, it's really not. And I say that there are some crazy valuations, and it's easy to get that impression. But none of the best teams I have ever met are in it for the money. They're not. In fact, John Doerr is one of the most famous venture capitalists in our industry, and he likes to say, we need a team of missionaries, not a team of mercenaries. And that's right at the foundation. One of the huge advantages that many of your institutions have over the rest of the world is that you're mission-based organizations. The kinds of things that you do and are responsible for, many, many talented people would do anything to be able to work on and contribute to. And I honestly hope you don't bring anybody into your teams that don't feel that way, that really want to help with what your mission is. It's one of your biggest competitive advantages, actually, on the marketplace for talent. And very much it's about talent. So this idea of being very passionate about your vision, whatever you might be trying to serve faculty better or help the way students learn, or learning skills, actually, just whatever that is. If that's your vision, you need that passion in it. And somebody in your institution, it's probably you, needs to carry the flag for that. It's so all important. Again, we don't need mercenaries. And you know, to be honest, it's so easy to find. That's one of the most common problems we find, is that the people are just mercenaries, especially the people working on the technology. You might call them IT developers. By the way, that's not a nice phrase. You don't want to call them IT developers, because they're not. If all they were doing were helping, your HR department at a university, that's IT. But when they're doing things for the students, for the faculty, this is the business of the institution. We would call these. It's not IT. It's what we call product. Whenever you're doing things for your actual customers. Of course, I mean customer in many ways today. I mean subscribers, for those of you that are publishers. I mean students and faculty and others in the university that are using and benefiting from your services. So number one is this idea of passion for your vision, and clearly articulate your vision. Number two, boy, I'd be willing to lay some money that when you have a big technology initiative, you have to go in front of somebody with the budget and make a case. You probably have to do that on the order of once a year, sometimes once a quarter. That's, and of course what they usually say is, I want to see the case. They might not use the term business case in an institution, but one way or another, somebody is assessing the value and the cost. I mean, any business case by any name, those are the two inputs. The problem is, this is maybe one of the most important points for technology initiatives. The problem with those business cases is not your spreadsheet. The problem is you have no clue how much value this is going to provide, and you also have no clue about what it's really going to cost. That's the unfortunate truth. Now, you can deny that and make up numbers, and I've played that game too. We all have. We can all just sort of go through the drills, but the truth is we have no clue on those two. Now, Mark Andreessen actually gets credit for the line, know what you can't know. It's in terms of technology initiatives, it's true. You can't know how valuable it's going to be, and you can't know what it's going to cost. Not yet. Now, I'm not saying you should just be given a blank check. However, if you go to a venture capitalist and say, we'd like to do this, we need $3 million for that, they'll say, you're crazy. There's no way we're doing $3 million for this. You haven't shown us anything. All you've shown us is a spreadsheet with a bunch of numbers that are probably nonsense. So they'll say, all right, if I believe in what you're trying to do, if I believe you have the team, I'll give you a little bit of money. In the VC world, it's called angel funding or seed funding. Just give you a little bit of money to go figure out the answers to those two all-important questions. How valuable would it be, and how much would it really cost? And once you get good answers to that, then they have the multi-million-dollar checks, but not before. And it's interesting because that's how, I mean, venture capitalists are professional portfolio managers. This is what they do, invest in technology products. And it always amazes me how big companies, big institutions, they still throw so much good money away because they don't understand this basic notion that you just can't know there are things you can't know yet, and we have to go figure those out. So instead, we embrace that, and we figure out how to answer those questions fast. So number one, know what you can't do. No. Similarly, and maybe even more of a sacred cow in your institution, is knowing what your customers can't know. So this is such a common problem. Before he died, Steve Jobs used to hold up his iPhone and used to say, you can conduct 100 focus groups. You will never get an iPhone. Okay, is everybody? Focus groups are basically when you get a group of customers together and you ask them what they want. I mean, it sounds so good, and it sounds so logical. It just doesn't work. And there's two fundamental reasons why it doesn't work. And this is not a knock on the students. It's not a knock on your faculty. It's just reality. Number one reason is because they might be experts in how they're going to use something and what they need out of it, but they're not experts in the technology. They don't know what's possible. They literally don't know what's possible. And that's what you and your teams need to bring to the table is what's actually possible. Most people in a focus group, they'll just describe based on what they know. And usually what they know is what they already have, and then address some annoyances with whatever they have. You'll never get something significantly better by talking to your customers. There's a great line actually. Jeff Bezos, who's the CEO of Amazon, likes to tell his teams, his product teams, he likes to get them together and say, the biggest mistake you can make is listening to our customers. And he says, look, your job is to invent great solutions on their behalf. But then he likes to say, the second biggest mistake you can make is not listening to your customers. Because that's actually how we get over a lot of this, is to talk to our users, talk to our faculty, students all the time. Much more than you probably are. So anyway, the first big reason we can't just ask our customers is they don't know what's possible. That's our job. Second, and this is true not just with your students and faculty and subscribers and such. This is true with all of us. It was true with Steve Jobs. None of us with technology-enabled products, we just don't know what we want until after we see it. We think we know what we want, then we see it, and then we realize all the things about that we don't want and why it doesn't work for us. It's just this second-order effect aspect to technology products. And so we, again, embrace that. You'll hear product teams talk about this concept of trying out many, many approaches, many, many iterations and ideas. And we have many techniques for doing that, which is really what product discovery is. Product discovery is just the term we use for quickly determining the good ideas from the bad. There are going to be many, many ideas. In fact, if I sat down with any of your teams, I'm pretty sure, any of your organizations, pretty sure we'd very quickly fill up whiteboards with terrific ideas. But the problem is, well, I call it the 2 inconvenient truths about product. The first inconvenient truth is that at least half of the ideas on that whiteboard are never going to work. They're never going to work with faculty, students, anybody. And the reason is, well, there's a lot of reasons actually it might not work. Most common reason I see is that we're all excited about something, but they're not excited about something. That's just very, very common. Sometimes they are potentially excited about it, and then they try it, and it's so complicated, then they just say it's more trouble than it's worth. It's too complex. They don't want to sit through a video to figure out how to work something. And so, and sometimes it just turns out to be way too much time and money to build, and so we end up pulling the plug halfway through. But for whatever reason, at least half of the ideas on that whiteboard, I promise you, are not going to work. Now, the other inconvenient truth, which is sort of the double whammy here, the other inconvenient truth is for the half that could work, it takes several iterations before it gets good enough that it works well enough that people get the value out of it. And that's, sometimes that's 3, 4 iterations, sometimes it's more. The problem is if your organization's technology funding process is such that there's this big dog and pony show every time you want to go through this, you're not going to last. First of all, whoever it is that authorizes these things will lose confidence in you long before you get to where you need to be. They just run out of time, run out of money, for whatever reason, they'll probably pull the plug. Hence these horrible batting averages. You may recognize the term we use for what I've been hinting at called waterfall process. It's this way of you make a big proposal and you do all this thinking about what it should be, and then you go and design all the details, and then you finally get some developers to build something, and then you finally roll it out, and then of course it's this big anticlimactic disappointment. And it's because of that overall process I've described. So instead of that waterfall, we talk about doing product discovery. Product discovery is just a set of many, many techniques, some of them quantitative, some of them qualitative, that are all designed to very quickly separate the good ideas from the bad. At Google, they call it fake it before you make it. And the fake it is all product discovery, and the make it is how we build real technology products. At Facebook, they have another colorful phrase for this, which is the don't fall in love rule. The point is, after working on an idea for more than a couple weeks, we are too attached to that idea and we fall in love, and love is blind, the whole thing. So instead, we need to validate, try out these ideas before we fall in love, which is generally, by the way, less than 2 weeks. So I will just put that out there. As an institution, you need to be able to try out and get data on your ideas in generally 2 weeks or less. Not 2 months, and certainly not 2 years. I meet organizations, not just in academia, that are literally measured more along the lines of 6 to 18 months. And that's just a non-starter today. So the good news is we have many, many techniques. It's beyond the scope of this talk. If any of you are interested, I've written books on the topic. I've written many, many articles. You can look up the concepts of product discovery. There's also a very important book called The Lean Startup. It's not really about startups. It very much applies, I would argue, to your institutions, and it talks about these techniques as well. But this is really, if you want to do technology-enabled services, this is the core competency. You need to get good at product discovery. One of the big differences, one of the many problems of that waterfall process I described earlier is it's all about output. It's all about these deliverables. Usually those deliverables are presentations and spreadsheets and then specifications and test plans and eventually some technology. And unfortunately, it's an illusion. Those things are not the point. The point, of course, is results. And what you want to do instead is try to reframe the entire discussion not about output, how many features are you adding to whatever your services are every month or every quarter, but rather, what kind of results are you having? Are you getting more students into the libraries every month? If the answer is no, whatever you're doing is not working. And it doesn't really matter. If that's our goal, is to get more engagement or more activity, then that's what we're focused on. And it's about reframing the whole discussion. In prior years, this was referred to as managing by objectives. In other words, stop telling people how to do their job and instead tell them what you want them to accomplish. And that's an old principle, it came from Drucker many years ago, but it's as true now as it ever was. Many of you may have heard a phrase called agile technology, agile teams. This is a family of methodologies that we use and almost everybody uses in the technology world. It's an alternative to that waterfall I described before. But it's such a common problem that teams do. They move to agile, they do go faster, but they still don't get anywhere. It's because they haven't tackled this, to reframe the discussion around results, not about output. Agile will just get you more stuff faster, but it's got to be good stuff. That's the point. Things that make a difference. Okay. So when you do product discovery, there's really whenever you have an idea, there's really two possible things that commonly happen. One is you just decide this is a terrible idea and you need to discard it or put it on the shelf. And the second thing, and this is the most common, is that we decide it's not quite right, but now that I've tried it, I know what to try next, and that's just called an iteration. So we'll just iterate quickly till we get something good. But there is a third possibility, and interestingly, the larger the institution, the less open they seem to be to this third opportunity, and this is often the big win. And this is referred to as a pivot. A pivot is when you're working and you've got this idea and you're pursuing it. We do a lot of prototypes, just simulations, the fake it before you make it. But we'll put it in front of the students and we'll realize something. So we may realize that, it's this idea, the problem's not with the idea. The problem's not even with whether it's quite right. The problem is we're solving the wrong problem for the students. We should be solving a different problem, or for faculty. Or maybe it's not about the problem we're trying to solve, maybe it's the wrong kind of student. Maybe this is totally relevant, but not for undergrads, for grad students, or something like that. Those are called pivots. There's many different kinds of pivots, but the point here is sometimes our original idea, our whole original business case, was way off on the problem or who or what even. And so be open to this. These pivots, when they happen, and they don't happen every day, but when a pivot happens, that's a really good thing, because it now means that you've got a chance to do something even more significant. The reason this is such a problem for bigger institutions is their funding process is usually just authorizing something very narrow. And when you realize that the big win may be a little different than that, the bigger places sometimes put blinders onto that. Small places are just thrilled to get traction on something that provides real value. So we want to embrace pivots. And just by the way, many of the most successful services that you and your students use all the time are actually the results of pivots. Twitter was a pivot, Facebook was a pivot, PayPal was a pivot, YouTube was a pivot. These are all popular services that were the results of just exactly what I'm describing. This is one that's a sensitive one. Despite the success of Apple, I don't know how many of you follow Tesla. They are an amazing company, amazing. If you were to say, let's apply the techniques of Silicon Valley to the auto industry, you get a Tesla. They're kind of I don't work with them, but I idolize them. So they are awesome at this. But despite the success of companies like that, people don't seem to understand the role of design. Now, design means several things for you. It means, most importantly, it means what we call interaction design. The people who are going to use your services, getting inside their heads, understanding their mental models. The first thing we learn is they're not like ours. You never want to confuse yourselves with your actual users. And even though you should certainly be able to use whatever you do, if it's not for you, they're not as close to it as you, they're not as vested in it as you, and they probably think differently than you. So interaction design is one critical form of design. Another critical form is known as visual design. This is the emotional response. This is what a big part of what makes somebody trust a service or you. Third is, for many of you that create physical, like a kiosk, for example, in a library might be that you have a third dimension, which is industrial design. Many of you are worried about interior design, which is actually part of the design disciplines when you're actually constructing a library. Those are meant to be inspirational spaces, and good interior designers get that, and it makes a huge difference. But the point is, Steve Jobs always liked to say, design is not about look and feel. It's about the whole experience. It's about how it all works. And the key is that design is hard to do. And it's not something that most people are trained to do. And you will, I say this, I hope I'm wrong for most of your institutions, but I bet I'm not. My guess is that most of you don't even have this competency on your teams, the ones doing technology initiatives, because that's such a classic problem of that old IT world. But in a product organization, any of the ones you might admire, they have these competencies. They're in fact among their most valued members of their teams. Google always talks about engineers. What they don't talk about is they have an amazing team of designers. Apple does talk about their designers. They're the rock stars at Apple. But it's true at most of these companies. The rock stars are these designers. Okay. So this leads to, we've talked about designers. What this is really about, and probably the most important unit in a technology initiative, is actually the team. And I'm not trying to be politically correct here. I'm going to talk about collaboration and stuff, but it's not about political correctness. This is about a set of competencies that has to come together to solve some very hard problems. And instead of sort of functional organizations and silos, instead of all that silliness, what we create are small, what they really are little startups within your institution. And they're meant to run like a startup. They're meant to be a small team that sits together, that's known as co-location. If at all humanly possible, literally sits together, like as close as you are at your tables. You really want the members of the team to be sitting that close together. You need to make sure they've got these different functions represented. I'm going to go into this a little more depth in the next point, but there's somebody that understands the domain. In many cases, it's probably you or somebody that works for you, somebody that really understands the subject matter deeply. Second, you need somebody who understands the design, the users, in getting inside their actual heads. It's usually an interaction designer. And third, you need somebody who understands what's technically possible, the technologist. This is probably your most senior engineer person. And those are actually the three core competencies we look for in any technology team. There's some differences depending on whether you're building a watch like what Google and Apple are doing, or whether you're doing a service like a Portico or a JSTOR. There's some subtle differences, but basically it boils down to those three competencies. And those three, the other big difference is they're not transient. You don't just put them together, round them up, and put them together for a project. And then that project finishes and they go off and do something else. They are meant to be a team that stays together as a team. The difference is what they work on. They may choose to work on different things over time, but that notion of building a real team matters. It matters for a few reasons. One is, the truth is, collaboration is a function of relationships. And you need these people to you need them to go to lunch together, you need them to hang out together, and to really start appreciating what each other brings to the table. Also, innovation is a function of expertise. And if you're assigned to something different every few months, again, you're a mercenary. You're not a missionary. You're just working on whatever crazy idea came down next. And instead, you want this to be their idea. So that's what we mean by dedicated, or also known as durable teams. So they're dedicated, cross-functional, ideally co-located teams. It's amazing, actually, what these teams can do. You don't need that many of them either. And one of the nice things is they can be small. A common problem in institutions is they outsource too much of this, sometimes all of it. You might decide politically it's easier to hire Accenture to build it for you. That's not how we do this kind of product. You do that, you'll end up with healthcare.gov, something like that. Okay. So then the next key part is collaboration. Now, I mentioned, this is not, again, meant to be politically correct. I mean this in its best sense. Here's the thing. Any of these technology products today, they're give and take between three things. The needs of the actual users, the people who are going to engage with this, as represented typically by this person that has the subject matter or domain expertise. Then there's the actual user experience. The designers represent that experience. What is something that makes sense mentally? We talk a lot about mental models in product design. And then third, the technology piece, which is what's possible. Some things, almost everything is possible today, but that's really not the relevant question. It's really what's feasible. What do we have the time to do, the money to do, the technology skills to do, the team to do? That's what we mean by feasibility. And it's those three, a constant give and take. That's why we hate, one of the problems with that old process, again known as waterfall, is it ignored this reality. It meant somebody would define what it needed to do. Usually it started with something called market requirements, and then that led to product requirements, and that led to technical requirements. And all this silliness would just keep going and mostly produce documents, but the point was, it was ignoring this reality that those three things, the functionality, the experience, and the technology, are completely intertwined. They really are completely intertwined today. So what you're trying to do is nurture this collaboration, real collaboration. It's not designed by committee. I want to point that out because that will kill innovation. And it's also not a dictatorship. So the myth, of course, was that Steve Jobs was that while he may have been a dictator, he had teams that actually did this kind of collaboration. They really did. And what he really did is he would judge their results, and he had a very high bar. And his most common response was not good enough. And so when it finally passed him, it was awesome. Every institution has a culture, and I'm not really speaking to your institution's culture. I am really referring to a layer on top of your institution's culture, which is really about a culture of innovation. And of course, this almost certainly exists inside your institution more generally. But for you as well, if you want to create these services, when we talk about a culture of innovation, it's really all the things I've been alluding to. It's about valuing data over opinions. It's about outcome over the output. It's about a rapid test and learn environment. You know, we talk a lot about fail fast. That language can be problematic at times. If you fail in product discovery, it's not failure, because it's just an experiment. It's another test. We typically do on the order of 10, 20 a week of these tests. But if you actually build and test, quality assurance kind of test, and then deploy something after 6 months of work, and that fails, that's failure. Can't sugarcoat that one. That's failure. That's what we're avoiding. We're trying very hard to avoid. And that's why when people talk fail fast, they're talking product discovery and these quick techniques. So this is what I mean by a culture of innovation. Now, you know, anytime you're dealing with people and large populations of people, and you have that, we've got the people that embrace the change, and we've got the people that go along with the change, and we've got the people that resist the change. All of you, I'm sure, see all of those three of those groups. I just described what's known as the technology adoption curve. Jeffrey Moore wrote about that in Crossing the Chasm, but we live that all the time. And you're the ones that will need to lead your organization through these changes. That little anecdote I told you about Pierre at eBay, that was actually an example of one of the earliest examples of a set of techniques that we call gentle deployment. These are techniques that are meant to help people deal with change. You know, that was a very sensitive community. The eBay seller community was and still is a very sensitive community. Realize we're talking about people's livelihoods. There are literally millions of people that get a significant portion of their income by selling things on eBay. So when you mess with them, it gets personal fast. And so they are a very sensitive community, and we have to have techniques to help them digest change. So a whole set of techniques for that. But somebody's got to lead that change, and that's really what I'm hoping you're all interested in doing.